Imagine this, it's 1845. Queen Victoria is on the throne. The British Empire is at its peak. And there's just one blank spot left on the world map that drives them crazy. The Northwest Passage, a legendary sea route through the Arctic that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For centuries, it was the ultimate prize of exploration. So, Britain decides to go all in. They assembled the most advanced, best-equipped polar expedition in history, led by a seasoned 59-year-old hero, Sir John Franklin. This wasn't just a mission, it was a national spectacle. They had two incredible ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. These weren't just any old sailing vessels. They were bomb ships, built tough to withstand naval combat, and then reinforced with iron plates to smash through ice. They even had steam engines taken from locomotives to power propellers, a brand new technology for the Arctic. On board were 129 officers and men, a hand-picked crew of the Royal Navy's finest. And their supplies? Unprecedented. They had enough canned food, tins of soup, vegetables, and meat to last for 3 years. They had a library of over 1,000 books, a hand-cranked organ for entertainment, and even fine china for the officers' mess. This expedition was designed to be a triumph of British ingenuity and power. They were supposed to sail into the Arctic labyrinth, chart the final leg of the Northwest Passage, and come home as legends. In July 1845, a whaling ship saw the Erebus and Terror entering Baffin Bay, on the edge of the Canadian Arctic. The officers were in good spirits, looking forward to their adventure. The ship sailed west, into the maze of ice and islands. And then, nothing. Complete and utter silence. At first, no one was worried. This was the Arctic, after all. Delays were expected. But as 1 year turned into 2, then 3, a quiet unease in Britain grew into a national obsession. Where was Sir John Franklin? What had happened to his 2 state-of-the-art ships and 129 men? The search began. It would become the biggest search and rescue operation of the 19th century, spanning decades. Ship after ship was sent into the ice, funded by the British Admiralty and Franklin's determined wife, Lady Jane Franklin. But the Arctic guarded its secrets well. The search parties found scraps of evidence, a discarded tin can here, an abandoned piece of equipment there, but no sign of the men or their ships. The mystery only deepened. Then, the searchers started talking to the local Inuit people, who had lived in this environment for generations. The stories they told were horrifying. They spoke of seeing a group of desperate, starving white men, dragging a heavy boat across the ice. The Inuit described them as being thin, their mouths black and gums swollen. They said the men were falling down and dying as they walked. Some Inuit hunters later came across their abandoned camp. They found tents, frozen bodies, and chillingly, they reported finding human bones that had been chopped up and boiled in cooking pots. These stories were so gruesome that Victorian society in Britain refused to believe them. They dismissed the Inuit testimony as savage lies. The idea that British Royal Navy men would resort to cannibalism was unthinkable. They were heroes, not monsters. So, the official search continued, ignoring the most vital clues they had. It wasn't until 1859, a full 14 years after the expedition vanished, that a search party finally made a concrete discovery. On the desolate shores of King William Island, they found a stone can, a man-made pile of rocks. Inside was a small tin cylinder, and inside that cylinder was a single piece of paper, a pre-printed Admiralty form. This is now known as the Victory Point Note, and it's the only official written record ever found from the Franklin expedition. The first part of the note was written in May 1847. It was almost cheerful. It stated that all was well, the ships had wintered in the ice near Beechy Island, and that Sir John Franklin was commanding the expedition. But then, scrawled around the margins of the same paper, was a second, much darker message, dated almost a year later, in April 1848. This second entry was terrifying in its calm, bureaucratic language. It reported that the ships Erebus and Terror had been trapped in the ice for a year and a half. It stated that Sir John Franklin had died on June 11, 1847. By the time of the second writing, 24 men were already dead. The note concluded that the surviving 105 men, under the command of Captain Francis Crozier, were abandoning the ice-locked ships. Their plan, to march south, on foot, for hundreds of miles to a trading post on the Canadian mainland. It was a death sentence. This single piece of paper confirmed a disaster, but it created even more questions. What killed Franklin? Why did so many men die before they even left the ships? And what happened to the 105 men who began that impossible journey south? For the next century and a half, the story went cold. The Franklin expedition became a ghost story, a legend of the Arctic. Then, in the 1980s, modern science stepped in. Archaeologists began re-examining the sites on King William Island where skeletons had been found. Using modern forensic techniques, they made a shocking discovery. The bones of the crew members contained incredibly high levels of lead. Where did all this lead come from? The answer was in their state-of-the-art supplies. The canned food, the 3-year supply of tinned provisions was their lifeline, but it was also a Trojan horse. The contract for the cans had been awarded to a cheap supplier who did a sloppy job. The cans were sealed with thick gobs of lead solder on the inside. Every time the men ate a meal, they were getting a dose of poison. Lead poisoning can cause severe physical symptoms, but it also attacks the nervous system. It can lead to paranoia, confusion, and madness. Imagine trapped in the crushing ice and the constant darkness of the polar winter, slowly going insane from the very food that was meant to keep you alive. This theory suggested the men weren't just starving. Their minds were failing them, making rational decision-making impossible. And the forensics confirmed the other dark secret, the one Victorian Britain couldn't face. On the bones of the skeletons found scattered across the island, archaeologists found hundreds of tiny scratches and cut marks. These weren't from animal attacks. They were knife marks, consistent with butchery, with the careful removal of flesh from bone. The Inuit stories were true. In their final desperate days, the starving survivors had turned on the bodies of their dead comrades. But even with this knowledge, the biggest pieces of the puzzle were still missing. The ships themselves, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Where did they go? For years, Canadian search teams, using sonar and underwater vehicles, scoured the seabed. The search area was huge, the conditions brutal. Then, a breakthrough, guided once again by Inuit knowledge. An Inuit historian shared a story, passed down through generations, about a ship seen sinking in a specific area, a place the modern searchers hadn't focused on. Trusting this oral history, the search team moved to this new location. And in 2014 they found it. Lying on the seabed, almost perfectly preserved in the frigid Arctic water, was HMS Erebus. It was an incredible ghost-like sight. A few years later, in 2016, guided by another Inuit tip, they found the second ship, HMS Terror, in another location, also in stunningly good condition. Underwater drones have explored these shipwrecks, and what they've seen is like stepping back in time. On Erebus's, plates are still stacked neatly in shelves. On Terror, jars of scientific specimens sit on desks. In the captain's cabin, a desk drawer is still slightly open, its contents waiting to be discovered. The ships are not crushed wrecks. They are pristine time capsules. They didn't sink in a storm. It seems the last survivor simply locked the doors and walked away, expecting to return. So what really happened? The modern consensus is that it wasn't one single thing that doomed the Franklin expedition, but a perfect storm of disaster. They sailed into a period of unusually cold years, leading to thicker, more persistent sea ice that trapped their ships. Their canned food was poisoning them with lead, weakening their bodies and clouding their minds. As they were stuck in the ice, scurvy, tuberculosis, and starvation set in. It was a slow, agonizing spiral of bad luck and fatal mistakes. The story of the Franklin expedition is a chilling reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. They had the best technology, the best crew, and the full backing of an empire. But in the end, they were no match for the unforgiving power of the Arctic and a simple, fatal flaw in their own supplies. The final secrets of what happened in those last days, the full story of the desperate march south, and the final moments of the last survivor are still out there, locked in the ice and waiting to be told. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by mysteries from history, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into stories like this one. See you next time.